It's a cloudy Wednesday afternoon. Hello, everyone out there. It's good to be with you all today. My name is John Lustrea. I'm the Education Coordinator at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, and I'm thrilled to be joined today from across the pond over in England by Dr. Catherine Bateson. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Hello, everybody.
It's well, and I'll say it's particularly exciting for me to be on here with Catherine because when I first started at the museum, all the way back in 2017, many moons ago, one of my first responsibilities I was given was to edit our blog, and Catherine, some of your blogs were the very first things I posted, some of the very first things I did when I first started at the museum. So it's coming full circle for me today. So this should be a great conversation. We're going to talk about Civil War music coming up here in just a little bit. Want to give folks time to get on. See, we've already got 80 people tuning in already, which is super exciting. Let me see here. 80 people tuning in. We got Robert Smith from Florida, Joe from Minnesota. People are already tuning in. That's great to see. If you have been liking these videos that we've been doing all throughout this year, I know I've enjoyed doing them, but if you've liked them, maybe consider liking our Facebook page, the National Museum of Civil War Medicine's Facebook page. Best way to stay up to date on all the latest content that we're putting out. And if you like this video, go ahead and like this video, or you can give it a heart or a laughing emoji or any number of things. And the more you like and the more you comment, the more people will get a chance to see this. So thank you, Paul from Harper's Ferry, Joe from Riverton, Kansas, Shannon from Friday Harbor, Washington. We're getting people from all over the place. Oh my, we got Bill from Copper City Brewing Company of Rome, New York. We got a brewer on here. That's excellent. So it's always fun to see where people are watching from and where people are tuning in from. So thank you for being with us today. Like I said, like this video, share this video if you can. It really helps us out. And another really excellent way to help us is to become a member of the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. For as low as $25 a year, you support programming like this. $25 a year, that's like $2 a month. That's, you know, less than the cost of a Netflix subscription. So if you can join a member, that helps us greatly. To do that, you go to civilwarmed.org/support, and we'll drop a link in the comments here shortly. So with all that said, just to introduce ourselves again, for those of you who are just joining us, I see we're up to almost 120 people now. I'm John Lustrea, the Education Coordinator at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, joined by Dr. Catherine Bateson from all the way over in England, and we're going to be talking about Civil War music today. So to get us started, Catherine, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be interested in, you know, history, Civil War history, the history of music, you know, kind of all of that. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Oh, that's a big opening question. So hello, everybody. Yes, so I have been a historian since, I think, forever. I'm actually the daughter of historians, and I just absolutely love all bits of history. But when it comes to Civil War history, which is the history of a country that's not of my own, that actually began around about the age of 7 or 8. There is actually, I've not just decided deliberately not to bring it, but there is a photo of me standing by the Washington Monument. We went on a holiday, Easter holiday to DC, and my parents bought me a book on Abraham Lincoln, and they bought me a book on George Washington. And sorry to any Washington fans, the Lincoln one was the book that really captivated me. And there's a photo of me standing by the Washington Monument, just reading the Lincoln book. I don't care what's in front of me. I don't care. I can see the White House. No, I'm just reading the book. And something about that has stuck ever since, for all these kind of years since. I just really love American Civil War history, and especially the culture of the Civil War and society during the Civil War. and all the different themes of American history that are running through the war, which are affected by the war and because of the war and all of that. And so that's where my love of the Civil War comes from. And I'm really lucky that I get to teach aspects of it over here in the UK as well. In terms of the music side of things, because other projects I've done before I ended up doing my doctorate were on much more kind of political culture and actually religious culture of the Civil War as well. But the music side of it, I wouldn't say I was a musician, but I used to play the clarinet and I can sing, and occasionally I can play the piano one-handedly. And I really love looking at Civil War songs. We can talk a little bit about where you find Civil War songs in archives and stuff in a bit, but while I was doing my master's degree in London, I was lucky to intern with the amazing America's Collection at the British Library. Amazing group of people. And that was during the sesquicentennial. So what the library did there was they digitized quite a lot of the archives that the library holds relating to Britain's relationship to the American Civil War and the wider British Isles relationship. And one of the sources that they have in the library is this incredible collection of about 244 Civil War songs. They come from two publishers. Half of the book is from a publisher from Boston, Horace Partridge. The other half is from the publisher James Wrigley in New York. And somebody way back in the 19th century bound these song sheets together, these small song sheets, and created a book of Civil War songs. I should warn you, if anyone's trying to find this on the library catalogue, it's actually catalogued by song. It's not catalogued as a book. It was for somebody. It's a private collection. And I actually went to look at the actual copy to look at what was in there, to write about the digital copy. And I kept coming across Irish songs that were in there. And I had never thought about the role of the Irish in the Civil War. And so that's what sparked my interest in Civil War songs specifically, and then also the Irish output of songs and music during the war. And that's what gave me the PhD project, and it's what I've spent about 5 or so years just totally obsessed by, and the song and everything like that. So being able to read music also helps with it too. So yeah, that's where all the passionate nerdiness about all of this comes from.
I love that story of you reading the Lincoln book in front of Washington's monument. That's fantastic. Yeah, fascinating to hear how you got onto the history of music, and you mentioned how you were interested in American religious culture, and certainly there's some heavy crossover, I would imagine, between religious culture and music culture, which I'm sure we'll get into. You alluded a bit to your dissertation, which I'm sure one day will become a published entity in some form or fashion. One would hope.
Maybe I'm working on it.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure we'll spend a good bit of our time today kind of talking about it, but give our viewers sort of 10,000-foot view, of kind of your angle and your project and what that'll look like.
Yeah, so my research at the moment, and what the book will hopefully be, is a more in-depth study on a particular aspect of Civil War music and song history, which is to look at the culture and the sentiments of Irish Civil War songs and music. And of the, as we were discussing before this started, the astounding number of the approximately 11,000 songs as a kind of base conservative number of Civil War songs that were written between 1861 and 1865. There are a significant number of songs into the hundreds dedicated written about by or relate to the Irish experience of the Civil War, and I look at specifically, depending on my focus, somewhere between 150 to 200 songs of the Irish, which is actually, considering how many Irish fought, and I know you've had Damien Shiles come and talk to you before, considering the number relative is actually a huge output of cultural sources about one specific body of soldiering and experience. And so what I explore are the sentiments of what it is that they're singing about, and then also how they use traditional Irish ethnic culture and amalgamate that with American culture. So the use of whether they're using traditional Irish songs or they're using American song tunes as the foundation for their music. Most of the sentiments that I look at relate to aspects of loyalty. The majority of them are written for the Union, because most of the Irish who fought in the war were Union soldiers. They're heavily loyal and devoted and patriotic to the Union. They really understand the concept of the American nation and fighting to defend it and to keep it united. They talk most about that, and they also sing most about their military service and their military service more broadly, but very specifically also their military service on the battlefield. So you get descriptions of their interpretation of what they did on the battlefields as well. There are some Confederate songs by the Irish as well that I look at that are mostly aimed at the Irish who fight for the Union. So there's a kind of crossover there. There's a whole discourse on the way in which song lyrics became weapons themselves, that they were kind of bandying arguments across kind of cultures. There's a little bit of politics as well, not huge amounts. Pretty much every sentiment, you can find pretty much anything, any subject matter in a Civil War song. The Irish tended to keep politics out of it, which is often not what we assume, because politics drive so much of Irish American history from the 18th century onwards. And then occasionally you get wider traditional sentimental songs, sort of songs about immigrant experience. But by the 1860s, lots of those songs are already in circulation. So they use the war to publish and write and create a discourse about their loyalty to the American Union first and foremost. And so that's essentially what the most of my work focuses on, is the manner in which they're doing this, using their war experience.
Fascinating. Well, that sounds like it's going to be a fascinating project. I'm looking forward to checking that out. And for those of you that want sort of a glimpse into some of the early parts of that research, you can check out our blog for some of the research that was used for that. If you go to civilwarmed.org and you type in Catherine's last name in the search bar, you'll have a number of articles come up. And I'll also add, if you have any questions throughout the program, go ahead and drop them in the comments, and we'll do what we can to get to them throughout the program. See, we got 139, 140 people watching now. This is great to see the audience keep growing here. You mentioned this earlier, and by the way, when we were talking beforehand, somehow I didn't know this. I was just astounded at the number of original songs composed during the Civil War, like 11,000. I mean, that's just somehow stunning to me. So when looking for some of these 11,000 tunes that are out there, where do you go looking for your sources? I mean, I'm sure there's plenty in archives like some of the ones that you came across, but have you found any in kind of places maybe you didn't expect? Where did you go looking for these?
Yeah, they're often found within, or they first get found within private collections. So you find them in song collecting is a very personal it's a very personal practice, and so people would have scrapbook and sew together and bind together what I would call music score books, which are the huge ones with the lyrics and the actual music to play, which are specifically more for the parlor, and then the song sheets, which are just usually the words. And so you find those in collections that are kept together. Some archives have them as sort of kept in single sheet. I have to thank the amazing work that American archives do in digitizing everything, particularly around the sesquicentennial. Actually, like, so much of the cultural ephemera of song sheets was put up online. So that's massively helped as a transnational historian. I mean, I have gone to American archives. I do visit libraries in America, but it also helps to just sort of sit at home on the other side of the Atlantic and look through archives.
Well, especially these days.
Well, yeah, I some of this I was doing before 2020, so it's like, yeah, I understand how they use the archives this way. What's quite interesting is lots of them get put up because they have very pretty intricate borders, and I think they're sometimes put into archives as to keep because of what they look like more than anyone studying what they say. There are some excellent works on specific Civil War songs, not kind of the broader and some ones on the broader culture, but there's more that could still be done about all of this. But in terms of unusual sources, sometimes what you find are snippets of song lyrics or verses in letters and in memoirs, and they, you know, you normally don't notice them, then you kind of actually see soldiers are writing home little bits of verse. There's soldiers who want verses being printed, so they ask for them to be printed home. You see song swapping going on between the home front and the front line. The families are sending songs as well. And particularly, I mean, I mostly look at the soldiering experience. Soldiers sometimes created their own collections. So one archive that I use quite a lot that's in Boston, there's a Confederate songster in there. And on the inside cover, so the hardbound cover on the verso and the folio, I think that's all right, I can't remember my archive terms. Whoever had done it had actually added 2 extra songs into the front cover, so it expanded that song collection by 2. And that was something that the digital archive at that point hadn't picked up on. So it was nice to see that in person and to see it being used. I've also come across a handwritten letter. So one of the songs I look at quite a lot is the Confederate anthem, the Bonnie Blue Flag, because the Bonnie Blue Flag is written to a very popular, at that point in the 1860s, a very popular Irish tune. And I love trying to find versions of it. This is the one before the chat where I said there's about 20 versions of the same song. There's easily 20 to 30 different versions using the Bonnie Blue Flag tune. And I actually managed to find a handwritten one that's written by someone who's living in Missouri, who is using the same structure of the song and the same tune to defend why they think the state should secede to the Confederacy. And so finding little handwritten gems like that, it never got published. It's only 2 verses. I'm not sure whether or not it was meant to be sung with the original Bonnie Blue Flag, which is a song that got adapted anyway as more states joined the Confederacy through 1861. But it's those little kind of, you find that in the middle of these songbooks is quite a fascinating find. They're the real gems. They're rare, but they're the real gems. And finally, as a kind of point on this, I should say that we don't actually have the full archive record of songs written in the Civil War. We have the ones that were published. We have some of the ones that have been kept through memoirs and letters, but songs and printed song sheets are ephemera. They weren't meant to be kept. We don't, unfortunately, live in a musically literate society by the same way. It'd be a bit like deleting songs off your phone or changing your Spotify lists and things like that. Is there where you find songs? I get very excited when people use songs, because it's an archive and an area of historical research that definitely needs more exploring, because it's quite rare, actually, relative by comparison to other printed song material.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. Like the fact that, as much of this survives is pretty remarkable, and makes you wonder all that didn't make it. I'm still trying to get over this guy in Missouri that picked his favorite tune to make a song about constitutional theory about why the state should be allowed to secede. I mean, great, there's only so much a good tune can do in order to uplift some what I'm sure were fairly dull lyrics about constitutional theory.
Yeah, I can only presume, and occasionally I've got one song that I know the journey of it and how it actually didn't ever end up being published. I think occasionally what happens is people are sitting at home, they decide they're going to contribute something. I reckon that song was probably destined for a newspaper. Mm-hmm. And because you often see, particularly from the home front, you see people writing ballad verse, and sometimes they're poems and sometimes they actually say they're going to be set to music. Sometimes you can read them and work out what the tune might be. And there's one song that I use in my research, which, according to the letter to the editor, was 18 verses long. They decide to reject it, I think probably because it's so long. After about 18 verses, you're trying to wonder what the message is. but the editor very sneakily decides to publish 3 of them out of context. So they're not the first 3, they're not the middle 3, they're not the end 3, they're, you know, 5, 12, and the end. And in that, what you see is actually the stopping of a whole song publication, but still some of that message gets saved. And because of that, I know that song once existed in some form. Unfortunately, the whole 18 verses have, you know, this poor, yeah, he used a soldier's name, but it's a name that just, it doesn't ring true. I can't find any evidence of the soldier. So I think it's one of those classic ones where the writer is taking on a nom de plume to write it. And yeah, unfortunately not. Again, they don't always get saved. So these poor people thought they were making an impact, didn't at the time.
Yeah, trying to become the next American cultural icon. Which brings me to a question that I sort of had right before we sat down, and I think I know the answer to it, given the intense volume of music that comes out. I mean, obviously there are tunes that are kind of more well known to us today. At the time, you know, were there like popular songwriters that people are like, oh, did you hear the latest? I mean, you know, like today, you know, people just can't wait for the next Taylor Swift album or whatever. I mean, is there a Civil War equivalent to Taylor Swift, I guess is what I'm asking in terms of popularity? I'm guessing no, but like, I'm curious, were there songwriters that a lot of people knew about and they were excited when a new one came out?
Wow, I'm going to borrow that line for future research. A Civil War equivalent to Taylor Swift. There's definitely similar equivalents to Bruce Springsteen. As a Springsteen fan, and my dad might be watching this, so you know, they're definitely equivalents. Springsteen's very Civil Warish. People ask me a lot of like, what would be the top 20 or the top 10 like greatest parade hits. I think, yeah, there are recurring names that occasionally appear on song sheets. Song sheets don't actually give huge amounts of information on the whole. Very few would tell you what the tune is to sing it to, partly because, again, this goes back to musical literacy. The assumption is you would know, or you could adapt to something, another tune, or you can make up a tune, which is why sometimes it's a bit easier for me to I can match tunes to verse structure. And even rarer still, will you have who wrote it, or sometimes where it's performed. But there are figures who appear a lot, and I think it's because they were famous that the publisher warrants putting their name on it. One of those is Tony Pastor. So Tony Pastor is both, well, he's most well known, certainly now in America, as being the father or the godfather of vaudeville. Pastor mostly gets his success. He's very successful in the Civil War era, but he's mostly famous for the bit afterwards and turning vaudeville into a popular form of entertainment for the masses. And I think that's probably because he used to work underneath P.T. Barnum. I think he learned from the master, who's at the background of all of this, if you dig deep enough. So Pastor used to write songs, and so you'd see his name on song sheets, or you'd see the fact that he performed it. And I think most of the times where he's performing it, he also wrote it. I can't prove that for certain, but the two do seem to kind of go hand in hand. And there are certain particular themes and topics that he used to sing about in his theatres. Most of them are in the Bowery, but he was also performing at other music halls in New York City. So he's quite famous. He probably would be Taylor Swift, actually. Yeah, he probably would be. There's also another guy called John F. Poole, who was doing similar things. He wrote quite a few songs related to the Irish too. He's quite heavily connected to the Irish community. His name you see quite a lot. Otherwise, you don't see very many. When it comes to classical music, we know who's singing, and we know the famous stories of Jenny Lind, and even just before the Civil War, there's a very, very famous Irish opera singer called Catherine Hayes, who actually dies right before the Civil War, but is actually sung about in Civil War lyrics, which is an amazing retention of how much she was admired by certain communities. So there's a few kind of key figures who reoccur. I would say that the tunes themselves are probably more in that top 10 than the actual writers themselves. So the old classics, we can call them classical songs, like Hail Columbia, or Columbia, Gem of the Ocean, Star Spangled Banner. My Country 'Tis of Thee, or the tune is to that. Even amazing, I see this on Civil War songs. You see, it actually says the air, God Save the Queen, but it's My Country 'Tis of Thee for you, and it's Queen Victoria that they're referencing. Those are the common ones that reoccur, and then there are reoccurring tunes, ethnic tunes, like the Bonnie Blue Flag, which is set to the Irish Jaunting Car. Amazingly, this shows Daniel Decatur Emmett's impact. Dixie is used a lot. I mean, Dixie had only just literally made it in kind of at the start, just before the war. That is reinterpreted as a tune heavily. That's one that I think, if we were all living in Civil War era, we would be continually whistling it, because we'd be hearing it all the time, north and south. There's a reason why it's Lincoln's favorite tune, allegedly, because it's literally it's in your ear. It's a constant earworm. So those tunes are more common, and then you see other ones come to the fore, more like the tune that's for the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which goes back to the religious thing, because that comes from religious spiritual tunes.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, that tunes would have been more common than, say, songwriters, as it were. It's, tunes are being readapted, recycled, as it were, and the lyrics are kind of the big difference. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Got a question from the comments that kind of relates to the next question I was going to get at. My next question was, obviously you heavily study Irish Civil War songs, and I was going to say, do you tend to notice any sort of differences, comparing and contrasting Irish music and American music? And Bill in the comments asked, were there songwriters, writing songs for specifically Irish units and specifically Irish consumption?
Yeah, so to answer your first question first, there are two types of Irish song pattern. Most of them tend to follow a general conventional pattern that is similar to an American or other groups, and that they're laid out the same way. Even they use American tunes. Actually, a lot of Irish tunes a lot of Irish songs use American tunes. I say American, it's actually American tunes themselves are not American. I'm sorry, this is a spoiler for anybody, but something like the Star Spangled Banner, for instance, that's actually an English tune that was written, the actual music that was written after independence. It's written in 1790. These are tunes that are circulating around the Atlantic world. Occasionally, what you will see with Irish songs, though, is the use of occasional Irish language. These are a real rarity. They're using Irish language, or they're adopting an Irish accent, and so they're written as if somebody with an incredibly strong Irish brogue is singing. And actually, they're probably not written by an Irishman. They're written by an American it's part and parcel of racial stereotypes of the Irish in the 19th century. So they're more similar to American than you first think, but they have definitely got little touches that make them unique. And this is the same for German American songs, and even rarer Scottish American songs. There's a couple of songs about the 1790 New York Highlanders, for instance, who are a Scottish regiment. German American songs tend to often be in German more than or sometimes a variation of German and English. And yeah, I mean, the most of what I also look at are the songs that are specifically dedicated to the Irish regiments in the Union Army. So above all else, most people assume you're going to find more about the Irish Brigade, because they have heavily dominated the story of Irish American Civil War history. So the brigade is formed at the tail end of 1861, 1862. It's eventually comprised of 5 regiments, 3 from New York, 1 from Massachusetts, and 1 from Pennsylvania. And they are definitely sung about a lot. There are, I think off the top of my head, about 8 different Irish Brigade songs. that have different lyrics to them. They're not the same song. But actually what there are more of are songs about the 69th New York, well, first the 69th New York State Militia, and then the 69th New York Regiment. And there are a tranche of songs that come out before the first Battle of Bull Run. So before the 69th New York even get to fight, they're singing about fighting. They really, this goes back to the idea of loyalty and unionism and devotion to America. They really show it from the start about why they want to fight. And then what happens through 1862 onwards is that the two get amalgamated together. And so you get lyrical conflation between the 69th New York and the Irish Brigade. There's a song which is called Song of the Chicago Irish Brigade, which is actually about Mulligan's group in Chicago. There are other publications of the same song that have dropped Chicago, and they're just called the Irish Brigade. These pretty much every song that is related specifically to a regiment can be adapted and shares the same sentiments and experiences as the other regiments. They use them interchangeably, and you can take out very specific battle lyrics, but they often can be applied to all. And as a kind of final point on this, where it relates back to how American they are, sometimes then what you see is songs that are written specifically about a state or a city's brigades or regiments. So there's always lots about New York. New York is the center of the publishing world, essentially. So that's why there's all a musical world. So New York does tend to dominate the narrative here. There's one song called the New York Volunteers, and within that the Irish are listed, and you know they're given just the same status as other groups. So there's a both specific but also kind of more, we're all part of one Union Army mentality. There's only one Confederate Irish Brigade song that I found, and I'm doing that because there's no actual official Confederate Irish Brigade. They're doing it they're singing about the Irish Brigade in the Union, and they're using it to kind of actually big themselves up more than they were. It's probably one of the smaller Louisiana militias that are writing that one. I know that because it's published in a New Orleans publication. So,
yeah, that's so interesting. They're singing songs about fighting before they even get to the battlefield, and that regiment is the 69th, which goes on to become so storied. They're already kind of getting on it before they've had their first battle. That's really interesting. And you pretty much answered. Gary had a question about was there any single regiment or single brigade song, songs about individual units? Obviously, even specifically with Irish units, but I'm sure plenty of non-Irish units had specific songs about units.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because actually there's never like a brigade song or a specific song, because there are so many. I mean, they could the Irish Brigade overall, and then the 69th New York in particular, could choose one of a good 10 on one side, 20 on the other at any given time. There's not this, you don't see the same thing that you see with John Brown's Body, for instance, starts off as a Massachusetts specific regimental song before it becomes this juggernaut that still exists today. There isn't the same for those regiments. There are two specific songs for the 69th Pennsylvania, who are also an Irish regiment, and there is one for the 9th Connecticut, which again, though, if you take out the words Connecticut, could apply to any group. And it's actually a very Connecticut song, because it talks a lot about Connecticut more than anything else. But for the big groups, so the Irish Brigade and the 69th, the ones that we know and see most, they don't have like one song where there's remnant. Well, there's still a version of the 69th fighting Irish today. What they're singing today has come down from a whole collection of different songs. These 69th New York, there are literally loads of them. They appear everywhere.
Yeah, the fact that there's sort of a descendant of multiple songs itself is kind of an interesting interesting thing. I was hoping John Brown's body would come up at some point. As someone that used to work at Harper's Ferry, it's always good to hear about John Brown, and of course the song. And I meant to mention earlier, I'm originally from the Chicago area, so always good to hear the Chicago connection. David Silknat in the comments asked a really interesting question. We had him on. It's hard to keep up with time. I don't know, a month or something ago, maybe two. I can't remember. But David Silknat asked a great question. Did any of these Civil War songs make it back to Ireland and then kind of enter the kind of cultural psyche in Ireland? I think that's kind of an interesting thought.
Excellent. Hi to David. David used to be one of my doctoral supervisors. So hi, David.
There we go. I wondered if there's a connection there.
There's a connection. Yes, David should know the answer to this because it was in the thesis. Yes.
Well, ever the professor asking the slightly leading question. Not entirely, but like a little bit.
I promised people I didn't plan it. Yeah, there are a few that do make it back. There are a few. I can hear somebody else in this flat's watching this. They're laughing at that. There are a few that make it back, but actually more specifically what you see is songs in Ireland about the Civil War being written as well. So they're hearing the news stories of the war, and the Civil War doesn't happen just in America, it's a global war as well. And so they're singing of news reports, and they write about them. So there's one particular one which is called A Lamentation on the American Civil War, and its subheading is The Awful Battle at Vicksburg. And they're singing about what happens at Vicksburg, and then about the fact that, particularly in that song, you have Confederate Irish and Union Irish fighting each other, and about the fact that actually we're all connected into this. That, these are people's sons, these are people's families. There's another Irish song which actually describes. This one always sticks with me. It actually describes a mother running down the hill to the post office in a village in Ireland, going to find out about the news that her son has died in the American Civil War. It's incredible. I mean, Irish songs are really good at the old lamenting heartstrings, and I say this as a Celt, like we're very good when it comes to pulling at the heartstrings. And there's what's fascinating about those songs is that they're just as interested and invested in what's going on, and they're more sorrowful because these are the sons of the diaspora who are now at war with each other. Interestingly, some of them then do switch, usually in the final stanza, to say about how they really hope that the Union will win, and that they totally get on board with Lincoln's sort of Gettysburg Address idea of this is about a wider picture. This is about a kind of libertarian republic for all, and they are the best hope, and so Ireland's looking to America to succeed in its unity. So there's an interesting kind of relationship that's going on there. The more traditional and the kind of more established folk songs from the 1850s, they're both being printed. They're originating in Ireland and they're getting printed in America even before the war. So American culture is swimming with Irish songs before the Civil War even starts. So they're two quite interlinked cultures, really. But it's an interesting thing because you don't see it or certainly I've not done enough, but you don't really see it in English ballad culture in the 1860s. No one else is singing about this, but the Irish definitely are.
Yeah, that's that cultural connection is interesting, and especially as it relates to at the end of a lot of these tunes, the Irish, saying, well, hope, it's a bummer the Irish are fighting each other, but hopefully the Union wins, which speaks to Don Doyle's book, The Cause of All Nations, this, the kind of global nature of the American Civil War, and that, pretty much every other country, if they're not directly connected to the war in some way, either with a large number of people fighting in it, at the very least, they have an opinion about the outcome of the war. And I think it can be easy for a lot of Americans to kind of forget that part of it. So I always enjoy kind of hearing about that.
Yeah, and there's another one that I've just remembered, which is also about the first Battle of Bull Run. So at the same time as the 69th New Yorker writing before and after the battle about their service, there's one that's actually written in Ireland, I think it's in Cork off the top of my head, which is actually presenting fake military news, because it's reporting aspects of the battle, but what it's doing is getting the very first reports that were coming out and being printed, and reporting that, key figures like, well, somebody who comes on to become a very key figure, Thomas Francis Marr, who becomes the Irish Brigade's general, they report that he's dead. Well, he didn't actually die. Well, he fell off his horse. There's miscommunication, and kind of fake reports are appearing, and as you said, it's important to remember that this isn't happening in isolation, that this is news that is global. It's the songs are the equivalent of the Twitter timeline. They just take a few weeks to correct themselves. But there is definitely a connection there. This is a global thing. It does also, I should say, this is maybe preempting any comments that might be coming in or questions about this. Irish songs on both sides of the Atlantic do occasionally touch on the issue of Irish independence, and the idea that military service in the Civil War will help them for a future fight for the island of Ireland and freedom from British rule. That is actually a minority, though, and when they do sing about it, they tend to sing about it how they're going to come back as Americans to fight for that, which begs the question as to who's actually going to run Ireland. Is it going to be America or Ireland? That's a whole other area. There could be a whole other talk, but there's an internationalism to this as well.
Absolutely. There are a couple other good questions in the comments, but I want to make sure we at least get to this next question that I have, given that we are a medical museum. What role did music play in medicine and or helping soldiers recover? I ask about that. One of my favorite people of the past, Union nurse called Clara Jones, she writes in one of her letters, she stumbles across one of her former patients at another hospital, and as she writes it, the first thing they say to her is, no one sings to us here. She was known for singing with the patients. I'd be curious for your thoughts on the role of music in the medical system during the Civil War.
Yeah, I think music is everywhere in 19th century society. It's a very loud society. You would always hear song. People would always be singing, or kind of, especially in the evening. It's one of the main forms of entertainment that you would be conducting in your home, or if you're in the city, you'd be going to the music hall. And there are, certainly in sources that I've seen, there are continual references for the soldiers in the evening, that there's that stereotypical image of them gathering around the campfire, but it's not stereotypical. They are gathering around campfires, not just to keep warm, but they're talking, they're eventually singing. It helps. The continual impression I get is that the singing helps soothe the mind and helps calm, particularly right before you're going to sleep. It's meant to put you into it's what lullabies are. They're meant to relax you. And there's I think this is in one of the blogs that I wrote for the museum, but the Irish Brigade chaplain, Father Corby, writes about his memory of sort of several decades on of the aftermath of Antietam, and how, he's witnessed, and all the men who survived it have witnessed the Bloody Lane, which is where the Irish Brigade were fighting mostly. They've witnessed how horrific that battle was. And they're based up around, this is Harper's Ferry again, shout out to good old Harper's Ferry. I love Harper's Ferry, actually. It's one of my favorite places in the US. And he talks about his memory of, they're gathered around Harper's Ferry, and they can, somewhere in the distance, they can hear someone playing a bugle. And they go, it's so vivid that this is clearly still very much in his mind all these decades later. They go from thinking about the horrors and the kind of what he calls the poor dead companions on the battlefield, and they start to think about other things. Some of them start to think about their childhoods. They are soothed as they go off to sleep, and it's a kind of way of calming and soothing. And so I think it serves a real spiritual purpose, actually, in the camps, to essentially get soldiers to calm down and to focus on something. It's therapeutic in that sense. Where I've seen it in relation to the hospitals and the kind of medical provisions, what you always get is it's a form of entertainment. So, and it's something to focus on. So there's one one source I found, which is from a soldier who writes about how concerts in the hospitals give them good cheer, and that it cheers them up, and that these are kind of good it's an entertainment form to cheer them up. There you see both in camps but also in hospitals, occasionally they'll put on little their own kind of musical acts, and so they'll put, you know, regimental songs would be sung, traditional songs from the homeland if they're ethnic soldiers, or they'd make something up. There's another soldier who's a member of the Irish Brigade. He fights for the 116th Pennsylvania, William McCarter. He writes about how his experience, he's put into a hospital after Fredericksburg. He's been into a hospital just outside of Washington, and he talks a lot about how he spends his time playing chess and cards and dominoes, but also how in the evenings there are clarinets, there's violins, there's something that he refers to, which I think would now be the equivalent of a cello, or possibly even a double bass, which if they've got to manage a double bass into a military hospital nearish front line, that's pretty impressive. And about how they also sing, that there are nuns who are singing, the nurses are singing, they're leading them in song, because song is something so communal. And I think this year in particular, and everything that the world has gone through this year, I think we've seen that the fact that the you know, people coming out onto balconies in Spain and Italy, and, you know, singing in the street and finding solace in song and in music is a very communal thing that is sort of inherent in all of us. Music is something that there's, particularly over here in the UK at the moment, there's been quite a lot of like really heartstring news stories about dementia sufferers and the use of music, and how music awakens up the mind again. And I think it's probably because it's not that we remember music, it's that actually music's one of the first things we ever hear. We hear about it before we're born. Music's meant to be very good from a very young age onwards. And I think it's that therapeutic soothing. It is medicinal. And they get that in the 19th century, or they, at least if they don't get it, they're observing the things that we would now go, yeah, that's a therapeutic form of help. So yeah, everyone should listen to music, because it's, you know, they got it right then and it's right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and like so much of Civil War medicine, they're sort of aware that it's good and that it's important, even if they don't necessarily understand the exact why.
Yeah.
Because they, you know, with Civil War medicine, they come to understand that, you know, being clean is related to good health. And so in the general hospitals, they make everyone bathe regularly. They don't necessarily understand the why, but, you know, they're trying to help people. So
Yeah.
that definitely fits in with that sort of narrative. Yeah, there's this sense memory that we can get from all kinds of things, whether it be taste or smell, and certainly auditory. You know, things with music. You know, those sort of things, I think, have an uncanny ability to transport us, you know, to all kinds of places. I mean, it's very mysterious in some ways, and, you know, and that it kind of defies, you know, a lot of logic, but it just kind of what happens.
Yeah, I would love to know exactly, or maybe I don't want to know, maybe it's more like magic. Like, it's something that's, and the fact that, you know, people like Corby and William McCarter, who's the one who's talking about playing the cards and listening to the clarinet and stuff like that, they're writing these memoirs decades later, and yet when you read those particular passages, I know this is my research, but they do it with such clarity that you realize that it's for the soul, and they remember it, and it just has this impact. And so I think that's why music and songs are so important. Really, they serve greater purposes than we give them credit for sometimes.
Absolutely. Really interesting question here from the comments here. I hope I'm saying your name right. Mart Lil asked about what about anti-war songs? Are there any significant remaining examples of those?
There are a few. The one of my favorite, well, it's not really anti-war, it's more an anti-war policy, is Give Us Back Our General, or Give Us Back Our Commander, which is about McClellan. There are occasional attempts through the Civil War to try and ban songs. It'd be much easier if they had radio, because they could have just censored it. The minute a song is published, or the minute someone learns a song, you can never actually ban it, because songs are learned often through oral transmission. So all you need is one person to know the song, and then that's it. So that's a song that's about trying to get McClellan back in charge, which the Lincoln administration really didn't like. So that's a kind of protest song.
Well, especially when McClellan is running against Lincoln for president.
yeah, and the song predates it, but it comes back with and it
right.
then gets that's another song that gets turned into something else. But yeah, definitely. So not only has he got to listen to about this, he's got to hear about this person being sung about all the time. You get anti-draft songs. They're the ones I think that are most focused on. Sort of, they are. I say universal, and there's not one specific group that's singing about being anti-draft. So particularly in the Union, but then there are certain protest songs that actually, because they're about a policy, so conscription's a policy, it's adopted by both sides can sing about it. You see those appear. Interestingly, and again I say this in kind of defense of the Irish Americans, the New York draft riots are the thing that everyone knows about the Irish. In song, they don't sing about the draft at all. They try and avoid that subject. What they do sing about is draft rioters, and they're quite critical of them. They use song as a kind of political, to try and make a political point. Again, it goes back to trying to show loyalty as a kind of load of complex politics going on at play there. So those are kind of the really big songs. There's never, you don't see, by comparison to World War One, you don't see the same sudden shift into anti-war and the sort of kind of fallacy of war, essentially, that you see with other conflicts. What you do get is a shift into more sentimental songs. So they're much more mournful, and they're much more lamenting the loss. You could potentially read those as protests, in that they're talking about this death all the time, but I'm hesitant on that argument, because they tend to sing about death quite a lot, and they're quite we talked about this before the chat started, about how much blood and guts and gore and battlefield scenes are actually in Civil War songs. There's no censorship of that issue. So yeah, sentimental songs are potentially a protest, but they're also an acceptance that there's a greater cause. That's the wording of the songs, at least.
Mm. And what seems morbid to us today, death was just so much more pervasive, even not in wartime, in 19th century society. So I'm probably with you on that.
Yeah, the photography, I think, would be the easiest cultural comparison. Those photos of the war that we're all familiar with, photos of the dead are not uncommon in the 19th century. At the best of times, on pretty much across lots of Western culture. So it's a wider acceptance, really.
Are there any songs in particular you want to highlight before we kind of wrap things up? I know we've been talking in pretty general terms. I want to get at least a little bit specific before we finish. Any that jump out to you that you want to highlight?
There's the one song that I wrote for the Clara Barton Museum a blog about, which is Our Lady of the Hospital, which is a very, I think, unique song in that it's very specifically about a medical environment, so it ties well to the work of the museum, and it's about it's the description of a ward at night. And it's very, again, it's all sensory. It's all about the kind of sounds that you hear. The one line is about the groaning of the soldiers, and then they're being soothed and hushed by this nurse who's walking up and down between the beds. It's on the blog for anyone to read the whole. I actually typed out the whole song because it's only 4 stanzas, and it ends with this image that the nurse is sitting there silently crying as these men sleep, and it's a very mournful but also optimistic song that these wounded men are being looked after. And the reason I find it such an interesting song and that more people should know about it is it's actually, this ties to my research, it's written by an Irish-born lyricist called Charles Graham Halpine, who would be like a Woody Guthrie, maybe. I don't know, I'm trying to do comparisons again. He's quite satirical, though. Actually, this is the point, he's really satirical. Most of Halpine's songs were written for very specific satirical and political purposes. Some to defend the Irish behaviour in the war and the Irish views of the war. Some are written to defend or criticise politics that's happening in New York. And then in the middle of 1863, in the middle of a collection called Songs of the War that Halpine had published, there is this song, Our Lady of the Hospital, that's not satirical at all. It's the most genuine song that Halpine ever wrote. And that's a song that I think people should know about, because it's dedicated to the women of America, and it's about the fact that, you know, people are, all these are sons of, you know, mothers, but they're being looked after by people, and they're being looked after by very young women too. You know, the fact that war is touching every age and every aspect. So that's definitely a song that I would love to flag up, not just because I've written about it, because I just find it, every time I come back to it, very touching too. The other songs that I love particularly, and these are songs that we don't know about very much at all now, are known as combination songs. These are incredibly clever songs. So these are actually songs, the lyrics are song titles, and the song titles are pieced together to tell a story, which is an art form that we just don't have anymore, and people don't realize that these existed during the Civil War. So there's one particular one which is called Mother on the Brain, also written around 1864, which is using all the sentimental songs about mothers and the war that existed. So things like Just Before the Battle, Mother, or Who Will Care for Mother Now? And they weave it together to tell a story. And the punchline of the song, because it's a slightly satirical song, is at the end, the soldier not only thinks about the mother, but then he switches his mind and is like, I'd like a bourbon. He wants whiskey. And the end is a slight reference to Whiskey on the Brain, which is another famous ethnic traditional song. And I quite like that one too, because there's this everything is all, there's a lot of laughter and humor in some of these songs as well. They're not always about gore of the war, and they're not always mournful. There's, you know, they make very funny points sometimes that still lasts as a joke today.
Well, which gets to your point of, you know, songs being as entertainment. You know, part of entertainment is laughing and laughter, which, you know, songs don't, I mean, there are a number of satirical songs that exist today, obviously, but it's not as common, I don't think, to have those songs that are kind of meant to be a joke. I mean, what comes to mind for me is like the Weird Al Yankovic, like I'm in the age of, you know, intense pirating of music. It was, you know, like he had a song called Don't Download This Song, you know, stuff like this. So, I mean, you have stuff like that, but it's not quite the same today in that regard.
No, and I guess it goes to the very best medicine in theory is meant to be laughter, right? So it's a kind of combination of the two. And I think I did put this in one of the blogs actually, but when SNL a few years ago got Harry Styles involved in this one, which was the production or changing of a song, and I loved it because it actually showed how soldiers change songs. So it's like, yes, this is academic, I can teach this, but also it becomes a joke, and that is also what happened. And again, it's about turning the serious into humor, which it is a coping mechanism for all times of trouble, not just for war. So yeah, laughter and song, that's the prescription. I'm an academic doctor, but if I could prescribe anything, it would be laughter and song.
Yes, well, and I'm not a doctor, but I do play one on Facebook Live, so laughter is good. And there's a number of great questions in the comments we just couldn't get to today. I want to close with a couple things. Number one, you know, they can look on all kinds of great online resources like the Library of Congress and other archives to kind of find Civil War sheet music and kind of get a sense of this. But if they want to actually listen to songs, do you have any places you might point people to, like recordings?
Oh gosh,
not to put you on the spot. I mean, I'm sure there's stuff either on, you know, YouTube or Spotify.
Yeah, there are lots and lots and lots. If you want Irish specific, there's a great songwriter called David Kincaid. You can find his stuff online. In terms of other Civil War era songs, like there are whole albums and playlists on YouTube. There is actually one of the first ones that I ever listened to is all the music that was taken from the Ken Burns Civil War documentary. That's actually surprisingly good. If you take out Ashokan Farewell, which is a made-up Civil War song tune, also an earworm. If you start from that, you will then find loads on YouTube. It's just there are lots of different variations and versions. There are Confederate specific ones. There are Union specific ones. So a general search into YouTube will pull up whole playlists and stuff. There's no one specific source I'd go to them for.
Yeah, that was going to be my sort of guess, just kind of dabbling on YouTube enough, and that you'll probably find some interesting things when you really kind of start getting down the rabbit hole from the more popular ones.
You'll also realize that you probably know the tunes because you know the tunes to other songs that have come from the war. And so, yeah, it's an eye-opening experience once you start dabbling and go, it is a lot. I mean, there's 11,000 to choose from at least. So it's
Exactly.
it's a lot to listen to for the next lockdown or whenever that happens.
Right. And then finally, we got a very generous question in the comments from Joseph. He said, might there be any way that we in the collector community can assist you in your research? And for all those whose questions, we didn't get to, maybe, what's a good way to get in touch with you online if you want to reach out to Catherine directly or see if, something in your personal collection might be able to help in her research?
Oh, don't tell me with personal collections because I have to resist going after songbooks. I have got a few Revolutionary era songbooks knocking around. The best way to get in touch with me is I will look on Facebook at your comments and respond if I've got time over the next few days. The best way to get in touch with me is through Twitter though. My handle is @Bateson. You will find me pretty easily through that. And yeah, just send me messages of that. I love hearing about new songs and sources and widening because it helps with the next project as well, which is going into more kind of the publication of all of this. So yeah, head to Twitter and you will find me.
Oh, fantastic. Well, this has been, I think, good fun. I hope everyone out there watching has had as good a time as I did. Hopefully you had some fun too, Catherine. I know I enjoyed this immensely.
No, I loved it. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for watching. It's been great. Absolutely great.
Yeah, so if you enjoyed it out there, give this video a like or a heart or whatever, however you want to react to this. Give it a share. That helps us out quite a bit. Like the National Museum of Civil War Medicine on Facebook. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where all these videos eventually end up. And if you came in late, these videos continue to exist on both our Facebook page and YouTube channel, so you can go back and watch the beginning of this or some of the other ones that we've done. And if you can, the best way to support us is to become a member of the museum, and you'll find a link in the comments for how to do that. That's it for us this week. We'll be coming back with you next week. Since it's the week of Thanksgiving, we got a couple pre-recorded programs for you. We got one coming to you on Monday about Confederate battlefield medicine with Mark Quatrock of the Blue and Gray Hospital Association. And then a week from today, the day before Thanksgiving, Jake, our Director of Interpretation, has a great video about the celebration of Thanksgiving in Civil War hospitals, which I'm sure involved some amount of music and fanfare as well. So should be a good time. Make sure you tune into those. And until next time, this is John and Catherine signing off.